Hello, thank you for joining us for Hello Live. My name is Sharon Soliday, and I am excited to be here today and share with you 5 common complaints we typically hear from parents sitting across the table. I actually wanted to start and say thank you for tuning in specifically to today. Because if you are here today, then what that's telling me is that you're actually concerned about what's happening with parents and what they think, which is excellent, because unfortunately we get so tied up and busy in the schools in our process, we can actually forget who our customers and clients really are. Bear with me today. I think some of you may know what some of these questions or common complaints may be, but I think you might also have some additional ideas. Chime in, and we may see some overlap or some very different ideas from other people. So let's get started with the first one. Complaint number 1, and I'm calling these complaints. I intentionally am doing that because sometimes we get very focused and we try to be child-centered, but in the end they are minors and we are responsible and accountable to their parents. And we forget that because we don't meet with parents frequently, but as speech pathologists and occupational therapists and PT, we have a lot of autonomy in the schools, not only to do what we are doing in terms of our therapy and diagnostics for our students, but an end outcome product. Unlike teachers who even have to sometimes answer to building administrators or the district as far as how far kids make progress in reading or math during any given year, no one really looks to us and holds us to any sort of accountability. 1, because kids are different. 2, you can't really project and say this is exactly where a kid should be at the end of a year. There are just too many variables sometimes with kids with special needs. But in reality, sometimes that autonomy can be too much and it gives us a little too much liberty. So let's start with the first complaint. Number 1, who are you? I marvel when I substitute in a building as we get around the table and teams get very comfortable with each other because we spend all day running around together and running around with kids and running around to meet deadlines. And we are very aware of how much work there is to do and what kind of schedule we have to be on. Well, that's our schedule, and that's not parents' schedule. And unfortunately, yes, thank you, Sharon. You should be advancing to the next slide. I need to get back into the swing of this. So the concern is that is our schedule. And parents have their own agenda coming into a meeting. Whether or not they ever say it out loud, they always have their own agenda. And they have their own questions and their own concerns. But we jump right into things, and often we presume, well, I've talked to this parent on the phone a couple of times, but in reality, they may not really remember who you are. Families, if you're a part of a family, which we all are, we have our own frenetic activities that are going on that can really distract us. We shouldn't presume that parents even remember who is sitting around the table, even if we have lots of interaction or wave to them after school. Every meeting should consistently start by introducing who is around the table, and not only who they are, but why are they at that meeting. And I don't care if you've said to the same family for 7 years, okay, I'm here because I work with your child in reading, and so now it's year 8 and you're not going to say that. Say it again and talk about what you're bringing to the table. I'm going to be talking about reading scores where they were a year ago, and then the progress that they've made to date, and really what we can be looking forward to accomplishing. And have every person at the table take a minute to do that. It is not a waste of time. We, as I will say in a final concern, or the final slide, that we are far more threatening than we even realize. And so build that bridge very quickly by at least putting us all on the same page. The next complaint I think is obvious to most of us who have ever been in one of our meetings. I think if I was to show up at Google and be sitting around one of their team meetings and listening to their IT development, software development people talking, I would be like sitting on another planet. I don't understand that world. I don't get that world. Well, that's how parents often feel when they are sitting in our world. If you go to the next slide, I threw these onto a slide because frankly, that is what it is like sitting in a meeting with us. Excuse me. We throw around a lot of acronyms. we throw around a lot of process, like, okay, now we're going to do the IP, now this is a permission to screen, no, this is a permission to evaluate. You know, that all means something different to each of us and to what we might be considering for a child. That means absolutely nothing to a parent. So I would say here, parents want to know, what are we talking about? Don't presume if you're coming in for an annual IP and the child's been there for 3 annual IPs already with you in your building, that it's enough to say, okay, well, we're here again. Let's talk about, you know, how he's been doing and what we're going to do next. I think it's important we actually say, your child is a part of the special education process and a part of the special education program. And so as a part of that program and process, here are the steps. A child is identified, and then every 3 years they'll be reevaluated to see if they continue to qualify for services. And in between those times, we will be meeting to talk about specific goals we're working on each year and the progress that they're making. Take time to stop and explain, what is educational impact? I had a parent recently say to me, she was very frustrated because she took her daughter into this specialist. It was a dermatology. This is not a speech and language example. This is kind of shows how it relates. But she took her daughter in, and this physician sort of ran through a lot of things and looked at the kid's skin issue and said, that's just like an ingrown hair. That's nothing. Ignore it. You know, buy a new razor, I think is what they left with. And she was furious because not only did she not get her questions answered, but nothing else was considered, but it was very clear that, you know, the doctor made reference to a couple of other dermatology type examples or language or references. She didn't know what he was talking about. She lost all respect and he lost all credibility, and she made sure that in the future experience she had with him, you know, or that dermatology office, she never went back to him. So I think if our goal is really to be in partnership with parents, we really have to make the effort not to try to just fling our language out at them and think that they're going to have an understanding of what we're working on. You know, I'll never forget when I was in a high school meeting with a child who had been identified as a student with autism and a student with cognitive impairment, and she was in a self-contained classroom and always had been. This young lady had gotten lots of structure and lots of support, and the family was like, okay, well, we understand she's had that, she's making this progress, this is what we're looking for in the future. And the school psychologist went into more detail talking, this was a new psychologist to the team, went into more detail talking about what cognitive impairment looked like and how in our previous language it referenced mental retardation, and she talked about autism and what some of those limitations were, and the parents flipped out and they were furious because they said, you know, not that that language was used, but that they were like, you know, we're not sure what you're talking about because really she's never going to catch up then. Like, you know, that's what that language means. And the psychologist felt very much put on the spot, but later said to me, I'm so glad we started to have that conversation now in 10th grade, because really if parents are still waiting for some magical moment where the child is going to, you know, be more comparable to their siblings or their peers, where they're going to be going off to college in 2 years, that's not going to happen. And so we need to start settling in that reality check for families as soon as possible. So it's always good to err on the side of being more clear. And if that means your IEP or eligibility meeting takes more time, well, I'm going to rock your world and tell you you need to take more time. And I know you don't have that time, but if we truly want to see kids progress, then we really have to be in partnership with parents, and that means parents have to have an understanding as to what we're working on. So if you go on to the next slide, this kind of is the example I just shared, it kind of slides us into this. Complaint number 3, but when will my child catch up? This is a question that is often asked in one form or another sitting at an IEP meeting. And like any parent, you know, I wear a mom hat too, and my kid may struggle with X, Y, or Z. And my first question at a teacher conference is always, okay, so how long is it going to take for her to figure out that math process or that writing process, or, you know, what are we talking about here? What do I need to do to support her also? Well, the irony is that parents, there's this whole sort of shield we put around ourselves as specialists in the schools not to talk about, when that child's going to catch up for a variety of reasons. One, we're afraid if we say anything, we're going to commit the district to additional resources that we are not supposed to be committing the district to. And some administrators are very guarded about saying anything about what, don't necessarily talk about what else they may benefit from. We're not here to help kids benefit. We're only here to ensure they have adequate access to general ed and are making progress. This isn't private therapy. Well, there's got to be a balance between saying nothing in response to this question to saying something that is a reasonable, legitimate answer. Another reason, as I indicated in the bottom of the slide, is we tend not to talk about a specific answer because every kid really is different. And we can't necessarily say, well, if we do this, then this will happen. In reality, we should be able to say, here are indicators that we know from research will help kids make progress. Consistent practice, consistent follow through on behalf of the classroom teacher and the specialist and the family at home and others in the building. So there are things that we can say that we should really weight towards. If we know it takes kids 15 to 20 hours of direct intervention with good follow through to master an artic phoneme, then we should be able to share with individuals that's how much time it takes. If there's a field trip, that's going to cut into that time. If their child is sick or if I'm sick, that all eats into the time. But in reality, there is a lot that we can say. We also should make an effort in this sort of land of Oz that we live in, all of us across the nation, as we're looking towards standard scores and students demonstrating mastery. And I'm talking all students here. We have high expectations for the scores we want our kids to meet and the benchmarks they're supposed to master. And in reality, our kids really are more than the sum of their parts. That we really need to be able to explain to parents, yes, this is how they are scoring on standard tests. This is why they may qualify in terms of special education or disability, but here's some areas of growth we have really noticed. Now, here's a good example. Just last night, I was having coffee with another clinician, speech pathologist, who said to me, Sharon, I had to tell a mom, I don't know why your child is not making progress. Now, this was a 7th grader who had been working on S and Z, okay, just S and Z for 4 years. They started in the 3rd grade. Now, I think we can all agree that's too long. A child should not be working on S and Z for 4 years. And she said, I felt really inadequate that I had to share with the family that I simply didn't know. We needed to reach out to the community, to a specialist. She goes, I felt there was some underlying motor component, maybe neurological component, that somebody with more refined skills needed to look at and assess. I was so proud of her. I said, that is what makes you an excellent clinician. Because when we just pass kids year to year to year and we don't start asking why, then that is when we should be concerned. But sometimes, whether we claim it's our busy schedule or sometimes our egos as far as what we think should be happening, and we'll just keep doing this. But it's fair to say sometimes there are things that we just don't know. Maybe you need another clinician in your district to take a look at that kid, to say, why isn't he catching up? Why isn't he making progress? And it's okay to tell parents at times, I'm not sure what's going on. We are generalists as speech pathologists working in the schools, which means we have to truly be prepared for kids that are coming with mild problems to kids that have very complex multiple disabilities. And then, as we all know, there's no same profile for every student. We really need to have an understanding that we have limitations too, that everything in my bag of tricks may not be enough. And so this particular mother was actually really furious. They ended up finding a specialist in the community, a speech pathologist in the hospital setting, who was able to do an assessment and definitely say, yes, there's some things that are different we should be working on. And I don't know how that child is doing now. Hopefully they got the support they needed. But the mother was very upset in the moment and said, why didn't anybody say this in the last 4 years that I needed to go and do something, I totally would have gone and addressed that. But sometimes that first year, I understand you keep trying, but after that, it's okay to stop and, ask that same question too. Why? And it's not a reflection on you being a bad clinician if you don't have an answer as to when your child will make progress or when you can expect change. Another example I wanted to give you from that same conversation has to do with what our role in the schools are. When a family might see test scores that say, your child has a moderate language disability. Let's say they're in middle school and they've been getting services. This is a reevaluation. And you say, however, he's doing okay in class. He's not Einstein in the class. Most of them aren't. They're strong average kids, and your son is keeping up. So we don't really see an educational impact. Does that mean he has the most stellar vocabulary in the world? Absolutely not, if that's an area of deficit according to the evaluation. But in reality, we can't say that your child's going to catch up based on a public school general education experience in every content area. And that is the beauty of special education as a whole, that it's not just categorizing kids and putting them in a closet and shuttling them away from everyone else if you happen to qualify according to test scores. The beauty of the system is that it also looks at what's the educational impact. How is this child problems manifesting in classrooms, or how is it not, And sometimes the clinician asked me last night, what do you do with the child who, okay, in 8th grade is doing okay in class, but he still qualifies with that communication disability? And I'm like, I think it's more than reasonable to say that kids change. He might have qualified and in 6th grade maybe had great educational impact and needs, but due to excellent therapy and his own compensating strategies that he's developed and excellent teaching by the classroom, in 8th grade he's hanging on. He's doing fine. He's not failing. He's not getting a D. He's understanding. Teacher paraphrases information. So at that next reevaluation, or at that IEP, forget the next evaluation, at that IEP, you might choose to say, okay, he hasn't caught up per se with all the other kids, but he's coping well. He's doing well in class. And he's not doing well in class because he's had, 19 hours a week of intervention by him, the parents and the teachers and the specialists. And we are just not seeing that educational impact. So when parents complain that we don't answer this question adequately, but when will my child catch up? It can really be addressed and answered in so many different ways that there are lots of things we can talk about. So be thinking for your own bag of tricks, per se, in the conversation when you're sitting at the meeting with parents. What is it that they might really be asking you, or what else can you be addressing? And that feels far more like a partnership with families when you're able to provide additional information to ground them in some capacity. So going on to the next slide. Why can't my child do all of this in class with his teacher? Now, honestly, this kind of surprised me as a question in the top 5. But in the families that I talk to and clinicians and administrators, there's validity when you listen to your child with special needs come home and talk about saying, well, and I saw Mrs. Carey today, and I saw Mrs. Deborah, and I saw Mrs. Luann, and what'd you do in class today? I don't know. And so there's this sense of they're missing a lot of general education. And some of our kids are missing a lot of general education. However, there has to be a balance of explaining to, a lot of times we talk about, at least when I've been in the meeting, and I've heard parents ask, why can't you do all this in class with my child? There's a framework of talking about from the clinician or specialist perspective. Well, I can't be in every classroom with every kid. There are too many kids in the building that need help, blah, blah, blah. It's also okay to talk about it from the child's perspective, because honestly, wearing my mom hat again, I don't care that you personally can't get around to every classroom in the building. I want to know about my kid who's missing general ed. So it's important to frame it from the child's perspective. You know, why can't they get this all in class? Well, that's the idea of special education. Your child needs something different than the rest of the kids. If they just needed extra time or another paper or a parent buddy to sit next to them and whisper a little tip in their ear, then absolutely, that all those things can be done in the general ed classroom. But the idea of them being removed from that setting and receiving specially designed instruction is so that they can get the supports that they need to avoid having to miss further education and further instructional messages that are coming during actual class time when they are there. So I am very blunt to just say, try to remember to talk from the child and the family perspective and not why you can't do something. Because every time I personally am in a teacher conference and I have a teacher tell me what they can't do because of whatever, I want to know, really, well, let's talk about my kid. That's why we're here. And our next slide, and our last slide, I wanted to be sure to include this because it was a very insightful comment that a parent said to me. She said, you know, fundamentally, I really like these people, and I think these people like my kids, but because of the way things are set up, it just doesn't feel safe for me to ask any of my questions, which I thought, it's hard for me to relate to because I'm kind of a bossy lady, and so if I have a question, I'm probably going to make you crazy as the teacher with, you know, here are all my questions I want to know. And if you answer it in a funky way, I'm going to come back around with a different question. But a whole lot of parents are far more respectful than that. And they have questions, or they may have impressions or concern or a sense of, you know, I want to say X, but they don't know how to say it without sounding emotional or sounding like it's off topic. But because the reason it primarily doesn't feel safe to ask their questions is we run in sort of this, a very structured, very organized format of what we have to get done and checked off our list. And then at the end of our list, we typically say, great, do you have any questions? And families are kind of in a whirlwind trying to process everything we've just sent to them auditorily and in paper and writing and sign here. And at the same time, they're like, oh my God, okay, I now have 2 minutes to put together what I, you know, wanted to express. So I think I put on this slide towards the bottom that it's okay to force questions. And I think what I mean by that is it's okay to say, you know, this is a really big confusing process. And it's okay to just stop and give them some time to say, hey, you know, I'm sure you have a question. We'll just wait here for a minute or two while you know, collect your thoughts and, you know, create some space. You know, create some space in terms of time and energy in the meeting to let families kind of process through and then share what they want to know. And if it's always good not to quickly come up with the right answer to that question, but to create more space by saying, well, can you tell me more about that? Well, what do you feel about that? What are your concerns with what we've talked about? And you might create the language that's more inclusive so they don't feel as threatened. For example, you might say, well, every parent inevitably has a handful of questions right about now, or a couple of concerns, or things Tommy's done that they're really proud of that they want to make sure we know about. You know, do you have things that we haven't talked about? Like social friendships, or is there a move coming up in the family that, you know, you feel you might want to share that we should know about? So it's kind of creating a preparatory set like we do for our kids. You want to do for families as well by slowing down your language, tempering your body language, just creating an opportunity that this is an open-ended time where we're supposed to be asking questions of each other. And if you do that, again, you're going to build credibility and trust with a partnership that's really critical to students' success. That's between you and the parents that you're working with. And it's always good to validate it. And it's also good to say, you know, I don't know the answer to that, but we can try to find out. So don't feel like you have to be a master in that moment. I wanted to take the last 5 minutes and just answer any questions you might have. And Lori from Canby, thank you so much. She says that she also puts on her parenting hat in meetings and tries to talk from that framework. And oh boy, I really feel the irony that we're communication specialists, Lori, you absolutely nailed it, is that we can be some of the worst listeners in the moment. And it's our job to sort of monitor the table and say, okay, how do we help everybody else kind of step back for a second and just listen? And also remember, I have one of my favorite stories that I love to share. I have a very dear friend who's also a speech pathologist who happened to have a son that needed some articulation remediation. And so she had, for a variety of reasons, a private clinician come to her home and work with her son. And she said to me, Sharon, I was the absolute worst parent when it came to homework and follow through. And it was just, it's been madness in our house. And there's disarray and, Cub Scout material coming out. And someone else is off to a church meeting and someone else is going in a late night meeting direction for work. And she says, I have a whole new appreciation for what it means to even ask parents to do one more thing or to have one more piece of practice paper come home. It definitely makes me more aware of anything that I'm asking of families. So when families, I guess I want to leave you with this final thought. When families put aside all of their own busyness and craziness to come to your turf and to sit with you and to ask questions because it feels safe, take the time and to really share the message that you value their contribution, you value their input, and that you alone are not going to solve this child's problems, that really you're going to help pave the way, and that's what's going to make the biggest difference. Oh, okay. We have just a couple extra questions that I'm trying to figure out how to score down to. Okay. Rebecca had commented, how do you address parents that are concerned about having their child labeled in special education? This is a concern I seem to run into. Absolutely. That could have easily made our list. It's so common, though, that talking about that's a big deal, to have your child identified as needing special education. Everybody comes to the table with their own ideas and concerns about what special education means. I really talk about, think of special education as a big umbrella, and that your child qualifies under this very small piece, which means they need help at this particular time. It doesn't mean that they're forever going to need help. But, there's some validity. Special education brings with it some different stigmas and different awareness, but at the same time, I also stress to parents, it will give them more rights and more protection for their children, which really outweighs the concern of the stigma most of the time, than had they just be a child in the classroom without any structured supports. So jumping to Sherry, hey, not a problem. We all live in jargon. She says, thanks for the reminder. And she also wrote that catching up and honest discussions with parents, she's glad to hear it. Oh, Sherry, I'm telling you, it's sometimes a hard discussion, but it's good to come back to. And I think if I had to, in terms of your other point, if I had to speak specifically in non-jargon terms all the time, I wouldn't have much to say because it's hard. We're so wrapped into it, don't even realize it. And then finally, Jamie from Kaiser writes, have I noticed that parents are surprised to find out that speech therapy is a part of special education? And then they get defensive and that wall goes up. And, oh, she said the same thing I did just a moment ago. See, Jamie, we're right in sync. The idea is, yes, most parents think of special education, I think, as the self-contained classroom. It's those kids who, especially when they were in school, were very different kinds of kids, very multiple disability, a lot of needs. So absolutely, just as I said before, I talk about speech and language as just one piece of that, one support, but really don't focus on the big umbrella concern. Focus on the fact that your child has unique protections and rights, and families do too, and that will get the attention of school administrators and teachers more so than any other student in the classroom. So I hope that helps. I appreciate you. This, I doubt, was new information, but I hope it was a good way to sort of reframe or remind you of some best practices with regards to parents and their meetings and what they're thinking about. So I wish you the best of luck. Feel free to continue to send your suggestions or what you're interested in learning more about to Hello Live, and we will do our best to share it with you. So I thank you for your time. Have a great day.